Hello. Today I want to explain something that I think is very important, that is unfortunately misunderstood by most. The psychology of Donald Trump. The reason as to why it's very important that people understand him on a deeper level now is because senility has started settling in. It's quite obvious from his recent behavior. His charm, his wit are gone. He is getting constantly more aggressive, constantly more violent, and the trend is clearly aggravating every month. He keeps fighting back against the people that were on his side, and he keeps getting more strongly manipulated by people around him, which is typical of senile people that tend to trust whoever they can still understand as their mental ability slowly disappears. Now, right before Trump, obviously, there was Biden, who was already senile. But Biden's psychology was not Trump's. When Biden went senile, he started getting manipulated, he started getting weaker, but he was still only senile. Trump is now on a runaway course to self-destruction, and considering that he is starting wars and that he keeps lying and that he keeps, having access to a nuclear button, it's important that people start understanding what they're actually facing in him. So there's a few dominant traits that define Donald Trump as a person, that show off the strongest sides of his personality and the most key elements of his psychology. One is, he likes boasting a lot. He likes to boast about his successes, he likes to boast about his wealth, he likes to boast about his talents, his power, everything about him. He is very boastful, he's very exuberant about his pride. This is one of the key components of narcissism, excessive narcissism, almost psychologically damaging narcissism. The problem is, it's not the only one. Alongside his tendency to boast, he obviously likes cameras, he likes people looking at him, he likes people paying attention to him, and he likes, more than anything, getting people to see him as superior, to get people that will not just look at him, but that will think that he's cool, that he's admirable, that he's amazing. This also reinforces the sense of narcissism, and it's unfortunately reinforced by another third element, which is his quest not for power, but for recognition. Narcissism is something that goes from a basic human need of being appreciated, of having people looking at you and liking you, to something that borders into outright sickness, almost universally due to a lack of attention when you are a child. Which leads me to Trump's father. Fred Trump was a notoriously successful and very aggressive real estate developer in the New York area. It's important to understand his psychology a fair bit to understand Donald's. Fred was born to a relatively successful family, which unfortunately lost the father of the family when Fred was 13 years old. At 13, he was the eldest boy in his household, and he had to overcome the difficulties of life at such a young age. He had to take care of his older sister, his mother, and his younger brother. This was an extreme strain on someone who was too young to take it. This is something that has existed in another very famous example, which is Michael Jackson, who was tasked with jobs that frankly did not belong on the shoulders of a very young boy who later down in life, as it's well known, started having serious psychological problems and tried to recapture a childhood that he never really got in full. Fred obviously was not like Michael Jackson, but the idea that negative, very strong adverse reactions to stimuli that are overly strong in a young child, or in this case a young teenager, is very, very commonly the basis for psychological defects. In the case of Fred, he was noted as extremely hardworking and ambitious. He was intensely frugal and thrifty. As a parent, he came across as strict, authoritarian, aloof, and emotionally distant. He enforced rules like curfews, no cursing, no snacking between meals, and precise table manners. He received daily reports on his children's behavior and doled out punishments. All of this points out to someone who, when he was young, had to overcome extreme trials too young and felt like he needed to make his children as tough as him. But this comes with a big problem. Fred Trump was extremely successful. And this meant that these kinds of demands placed on his children, including Donald, of course, did not make much sense. The Trumps were not poor. They were rich. They were very successful real estate developers. Fred was very absent. He worked a lot, 7 days a week. He was very, very often unable to connect emotionally with his children because, as far as he was concerned, as long as he made more money, he was doing what he had to do for his family, which was still a very common mentality in his era, in the 50s and 60s. From that kind of basis, you can infer a few key elements. One is that Trump grew up in a comfortable environment, but was still asked by his father to perform as if they were going to face great hardships. This is often seen as something that will toughen up the children, and technically it does. But if it's done too young, or if the children do not have the proper stimuli for it, then they will naturally try to escape it. Young Donald was treated as if he was going to face a war, as if he was going to face an extremely tough business, as if he was going to face things that were going to demand a life or death effort out of him. But at the same time, he lived in great comfort and with great ease. And this creates a cognitive dissonance in the child, which he will then carry on for the rest of his life, where he does not understand why things have to be so tough when they very clearly do not need to be so tough. And at the same time, and this is something that is very public, when Donald started out in life, he was helped out by his father. There is the very famous meme of a small loan of $1 million, which as a matter of fact was actually a loan of almost 60 million. It seems that Fred Trump was the kind of person that would demand extreme efforts from his children, but then when they did not perform, when they failed, he would just give them a lot of money. He would just help them out. He would just save them every time they screwed up. He would help them out no matter what. And this combined with the earlier problem of cognitive dissonance between what is asked and what he actually needs to do. Donald learned that he was rich and he had it fine and his life should be easy, but he kept being tasked with behaving as if everything was going to be very difficult. The natural tendency, when you're given a task that in your eyes makes no sense or shouldn't be done, and you cannot say no because in this case it's your father and he is very authoritative, the natural tendency is to lie. It's to fake it. You want to please the person that has these high demands and high authority upon you, but at the same time, you do not see a real point, so you're not going to put in the real effort. And this, combined with the fact that Donald wanted recognition from a very absent father, from a very demanding father, is another driving factor of his narcissism. So to summarize, one, you have a person that since childhood has been under heavy pressure to do things that did not make much sense for him and that he started faking. 2, that pressure never let go because even after he became an adult, Donald entered real estate like his father. He wanted to show his father that he could do it all the way. And 3, as we've said with the small loan of $1 million, which later was compounded by multiple failures of ventures and including casinos, Donald never really became good at his job. He never wanted to have his father's proclivities. If Fred was very thrifty, if he was a spendthrift, if he was a penny pincher, Donald is everything but. Everything is gold. This is typical of compensation for things you wanted when you were a child that you never got. Again, Michael Jackson is the go-to example here. He did not have a lot of fun when he was a child. He did not have a lot of innocence. He had to start working from very early. So when he became an adult and became very rich, he started having sleepovers with children. And people assumed this was something sexual or insane. It was certainly very indicative of terrible psychological disorders. But it was not sexual. It was just someone who could not have a normal childhood and who tried to compensate for the lack of childhood even when he had reached 30 or 40. This basic understanding of Trump paints him not just as a narcissistic character, but as someone who fundamentally wants to compensate from the weaknesses, the failures that he had in his childhood. He kept disappointing his father, who had high demands that Trump deep down did not understand the point of. His father was someone that was very demanding, not just in their work, not just in their skills, but in their general behavior. And Trump, on the contrary, very often likes to boast. He likes to show off his wealth. He likes to show off that he's successful. And the mix of these elements paints a psychological portrait of someone that is not so much, let's say, narcissistic in a manipulative sense, but much more narcissistic in the needy sense. Narcissists will all exteriorize their emotional problems one way or another. The way Trump does it is that he very visibly tries to be as shiny, as rich, and as successful as possible to compensate for the fact that this is what his father asked out of him. But at the same time, because he never really got the point of what his father was asking out of him, to be a spendthrift, to be cheap, to try to save every penny, he just faked it. And somebody that keeps faking what is asked out of him will become a very good faker, but he will never become good at the thing that is asked out of him because, in the first place, he never saw the point of it. Which explains a lot of his career. A lot of people say Donald Trump had a terrible career in real estate. He was not a very good investor. He was very boastful, yes. He acted like he was great, but he crashed his casinos. A lot of his ventures failed. A lot of his stuff failed. Yeah, I'm sure they did. But in the first place, he never saw the point of doing things the way his father wanted, which creates a vicious circle. You're bad at what you are supposed to do because you don't really see the point. And because you don't see the point, you don't ever get better. But because you don't ever get better, your skills never grow, except at lying. You become extremely good at faking it. You become extremely good at showing off. You become extremely good at being the man that you think they want you to be. When Trump had failed enough in real estate, he started switching to reality television, where he acted the very competent boss, the man that understood very well how to do things, and who judged others for how good or bad they were. That's what The Apprentice was about. There's other events that we could talk about here. There was this case where he showed off against some robber in New York and had a big article in the press about it and humble bragged. There are cases where he became a minor TV personality in famous movies. But the point of it, the key defining element, is not so much him being watched, it's him being seen as superior. He doesn't like being watched for who he is, which is indicative again of a narcissistic person with a fairly fragile ego. This core element of his personality drives his career, both real estate, reality TV, and later in politics. It drives his image of himself. He does not want to be talented. He wants to be seen as talented. He does not want to be as good at the job as his father, because he never really saw the point. He wants to be seen as very successful. And I'm not saying he has no success or no talent at all. I'm saying the point is not to be successful or talented. The point is to be seen as such.